3, 2, 1. Let's go! I'm the host of the PB Podcast, Troy Tittlemeyer, and I got to sit down today with DeWitt Smith.
What's left of DeWitt Smith?
Hey, one of our longest podcasts, but man, you're a heck of a storyteller and just a lot of information, a lot of knowledge and wisdom coming from DeWitt Smith today, and so that we'll get into that. But I wanted to for sure give a shout out to Trunkline, one of our major sponsors, a really exciting, revolutionary tool of marketing your product, marketing your services, and helping you to win bids, helping you to track your projects. It's a really cool software, really cool website. Trunkline, thank you for what you do and your support to the PBE podcast and the South Texas Geologic Society. South Texas Geologic Society, we're going to start doing events together. We're starting to do happy hours. We're going to bring a network together in South Texas that's, here to help build, here to sustain the oil and energy demand that we have for many years to come. Where are we going to drill new wells? How are we going to develop South Texas from here? Those are the people who show up to our events, and that's part of the South Texas Geologic Society, which there's a Christmas party coming up, December 15th, Christmas party, right here in South Texas, right here in San Antonio. Brought to you by the South Texas Geologic Society. Contact Justin Sharp, Justin W. Sharp at gmail.com. He can help you with if you want to sponsor that Christmas party and certainly get you tickets and get you registered for it so you can meet the people who are, keeping the drilling alive, keeping the oil flowing. It's incredible what this infrastructure that's almost 100 years old, or in some cases, like you brought up in this show, DeWitt, over 100 years old of producing commercial energy, oil and gas, and then the men and women that continue to show up every day, and for the rest of their career, they're going to help sustain that infrastructure, help continue that on, getting oil from the ground to the tanks to the refineries back to the gas stations.
But first, they've got to be connected, Troy. Right?
That's right.
And that's what you guys are doing. That's cool.
Yeah. Right on. And so, man, what dropped out from this show, I can't really pinpoint one specific thing besides, your experience. You bring us from the 70s to today, and you're one of the last prospects that you're put together, and you have the ability and you have the experience of what it takes to put the land, legal, engineering, geology, all the way to the facilities, all the way to the refinery, all the way to electrical, how you're going to get your electrical out there. You bring all that in to an area, and man, it's pretty exciting when you look into the details.
And that's why I told you it's going to be a lot of work for us, and it's going to be very exciting. And I said, Troy, I'm trying to retire, but this one won't let me go. Try to kill it, will you please?
That's
and
right.
You did everything you could to kill it.
That's
and we
right.
just kept finding more and more reasons for it to exist. There's an old saying that says you're either busy being born or you're busy dying.
Damn it.
You got to keep your dreams alive. And this is exciting. This is why we're in the oil and gas business. This is what we do.
This episode is brought to you by Trunkline. You probably know Trunkline as the company that makes the legendary oilfield horizontal drilling socks. And it's true. Our Drill Baby Drill socks featuring a heel-to-toe wellbore are 100% American-made and are designed right in the heart of the oil and gas industry. But did you know that Trunkline is also a revolutionary digital marketing tool that can transform the way you advertise your oilfield services? For only $800 a month, you can showcase your company's project track record on Trunkline, and our automated platform will boost your exposure through social media, email marketing, SEO, and more. Now, whenever one of your new customers asks you, "Can you show me an example of your work?" you can simply turn them to your Trunkline portfolio. It's more effective than a brochure, it's less expensive than sponsoring a hole at a golf course, and easier than maintaining your website. Join more than 200 service companies on Trunkline by signing up at register.trunkline.com today. Let's go.
My name is DeWitt Smith. My company name is PetroRio. My telephone number is 214-533-1092. That's 214-533-1092. And my email address is DeWitt, DeWitt, at petro-rio.com. DeWitt at PetroRio.com. I started out as a landman. That's
Right.
my discipline, but
Right.
I'm an oil man. I'm beyond landman. It is my discipline, but I followed my bliss. I went beyond that into prospecting is what I like to do. And I like to surround myself with smart geologists, scientists, engineers like you. Okay? I'm not brilliant. I'm smart enough to surround myself with people that are. That's the way I do it.
Well, some would say that. Well, who's the smartest one here? Then I guess like how do you?
Oh, you
define-
are. You're far smarter than I am.
It's interesting concept because I think it's really, really smart to be able to identify what that is. That's a different type of smart, or maybe it's not. I don't know how to define what is smart, but I think without people like you that can identify that there's people out there with the talents that actually make good predictions and can help deliver on a prospect. We'd just be out there dreaming all day, thinking about.
You got to kiss a lot of frogs, okay? You're the fourth geologist that has worked on this, and some of them were I just couldn't even believe it. It's like, well, let's move the Diablo platform over here 20 miles. It's like, why would you do that? You got 40 or 50 years of geology saying where it is, and you come along. It's just, it's insane. Well, it is. There's, just because you're a scientist doesn't mean you're a good scientist, as I've found. But I really didn't know what a good scientist was when I started out. I kissed a lot of frogs back then too, just to come up with scientists to drill, the Fort Worth Basin, the Permian Basin, and find out who was good and who wasn't.
Yeah.
And these were like, vertical deals. A big vertical deal for me was to go out and lease 2 sections, and that was probably too much. A lot of it was protection acreage, You were probably going to make a discovery and maybe drill, if you were lucky, 4 or 5 development wells, okay? And your odds back then when I started out was if you drilled a wildcat, your odds were 1 in 4, 1 in 5. That got better with 3D seismic to where it was 1 in 3. But still, how many people on the planet go into a deal? You have to be extremely resilient to be an oil man, because you're going to fail more times than you're going to succeed, and you're going to fail over and over and over again. But it's kind of like what Edison said. I didn't fail. I just found 1,100 things that didn't work.
Oh, man.
And the other thing, of course, is, it's not how many times you get knocked down, it's how many times you get back up.
Right.
So, anyway.
Right on. Well, I would love to start with the conception part of the PB podcast now. As DeWitt Smith, it's exciting to sit down with you as, you're an oil man. You're an oil man. And how did you get there? Tell us a story of how you got there.
Well, I tell you what, I'd like to, can we start off at a different, that's a good question, and I'm going to get to that. What I'd like to start out with is what turns me on, what I'm excited about now in the industry. And what I'd like to talk about today, I'm going to talk about my history, but my history, everything I've done is led up to one thing, and that is natural fractures in shale. And 20 years ago, I was in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I was working on a land grant, 600,000 acre land grant. And I came across a well just to the southwest of this land grant. 90,000 acres of this grant is in Colorado. The other 500,000 is in New Mexico, so it straddles that. And I came across a well that had made 3 million barrels of oil vertically and was still producing. In fact, the last time I checked it was about 10 to 12 years ago. That well was still making 10,000 barrels a month. Okay?
Yeah.
And I went, man. So I looked into it. And I'm just read you something here. 3 million barrels of oil from one vertical well, no shows.
While drilling.
No shows while drilling. No shows while swabbing. No shows, period. Okay? Numerous examples corroborate the existence of tight fracture blocks and nearby high-capacity fracture systems. The Canadian Ojitos Unit E10, this is in Rio Arriba County, New Mexico, for example, was drilled vertically through the pay zones with air. The flow stream analysis showed no hydrocarbons above that of the background overlying shales, and the well produced no oil or gas natural. After frac treatment, however, and let me interject this, the frac treatment was leach crude with no proppant. It produced at high rates and has accumulated 2.3 million barrels of oil. Now, that was written by Al Greer, who was one of the owners of Benson, Monton and Greer, the operating company. And since then, last time I looked, it's been a long time, it had made 3 million barrels of oil. Okay, so this is written by him in the 80s. Okay, and he went on to write, and I put in italics here, clearly the character of the formation in the borehole was not representative of the reservoir. Okay, so here's the situation. If they'd gone out and drilled a well here, and this had been the first well, they'd called calf rope. They'd have walked away. There's nothing here. But they had already made the discovery, and it was now an interior location. Other wells had been drilled. They had, I think, a 78,000 acre block. 78,000 acres, interior location. And so they went ahead and put a frac on it because they knew they were in the middle of the field.
Yeah.
They knew it was naturally fractured. Okay. After fracking it with leach crude, they had, quote unquote, unlimited fluid entry. They were casing swabbing 2,000 to 3,000 barrels of oil a day. Now, this field, last time I checked, had made 23 million barrels of oil.
The whole field. The whole field.
The whole field. Not one well had ever flowed oil. This was completely, all of it was gravity drainage. It's on a hogback between the Chama embayment to the east and the San Juan Basin to the west. And it's on a monocline. And it's heavily fractured. They thought, they being the operators, that the reason that it was heavily fractured because they thought it was draped over a nose. Once I got hired my science team and we looked into it, we went, no, you don't see these kind of fractures from being draped over a nose. This has got to be tectonic. Well, sure enough, it's at the intersection of the Nacimiento fault system, which runs north-south for miles, and an extension of the Anadarko shear zone.
Yeah.
And it's a train wreck for the Niobrara interval that is brittle, that's encased in the almost 2,000 foot thick mancos. Okay. And so it just broke it up. And
yeah.
I mean, now the oil being low pressured and no water to speak of just rolls downhill to where the fractures end. And that's where the best wells are. And that's where the longest lasting wells are.
Yeah.
Okay. In fact, I had a senior engineer from a major oil company that will go unnamed for this, especially since we're recording this. And they flew in, and he was sitting directly across the table from me when I was making a presentation later on the land grant, which we'll talk about. And he kept interrupting me, and I was like, I'm going to get to it. This is a thorough presentation. I've got a lot of slides here. But anyway, he just kept going and going, and I would stop and answer his questions. And he didn't really know this was a 23 million barrel field. I was just, giving some ideas here. And it was his first well. And I said, he said, well, what was the bottom hole pressure? And I said, it was about 1,600 pounds at 6,200 feet. And he said, that wouldn't produce a drop of oil. And I said, 23 million barrels of oil begs to differ with you. And he pushed back from the table and crossed his arms, and he didn't hear another word I had to say because I had offended his sensibilities. This man was in his 70s. This is what he'd known all his life.
Right.
And he knew that kind of pressure was not going to produce oil. And he didn't want to hear any. And it's like, don't let me bother you with facts, So this 3 million barrel well really caught my attention. It was drilled in the 60s and it's still producing. All right. I went, I've been in the business for a long time. I've never heard of a vertical 3 million barrel well in the United States.
Yeah.
And I'm not really familiar with stuff, overseas or whatnot, but I knew it was exceptional. And I also knew it was very exceptional because the reservoir was shale. Okay? I mean, we're not talking about something porous. We're not talking about something very permeable.
Right.
Everything exists here in the planar voids. All of your porosity, all of your permeability, all of your storage is in the planar voids of these natural dilated fractures.
Wow.
And I'm like,
that's
man, cool. So I was like, I better bring on some smarter people than me to figure this out. And as fate would have it, I was at a party, and I was standing back to back with a gentleman behind me named Dr. Tommy Thompson, who was with Amoco right as plate tectonics was coming into vogue in the 60s.
Yeah.
I was talking to somebody else there. This was a kind of an oil and gas party. It was a cocktail party, but it was in Boulder. That's where Tommy lived. And he heard me say gravity drainage, and he wheeled around to talk to me. And I had been talking Swahili to people forever. Nobody, like I was talking, gravity drainage, natural fractures, and all this type of thing. And people were like, well, Tommy was like, he was all over it. Man, we went out into the backyard and we talked till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. We broke and I came over to his house about 8 o'clock in the morning, and we talked all day about this stuff. And Tommy had seen it in the Woodford in Oklahoma years ago. And so he was a structural geologist. Okay, he was all about rocks.
Right.
He was all about mountains. He was a mountain climber. He was a skier. He blew out his. He was going to go to the Olympics back in the 50s.
Wow.
And blew out his. Had a yard sale skiing and busted up his. Broke his hip altogether.
Sheesh.
Which was kind of funny later when I'd fly with him and go through, and now I've got a replacement hip, and I go with him to the airport. I go, let me go first, Tommy, because I know, they were going to take him in the back with machine guns and everything, make sure this guy wasn't carrying a bomb. Haven't flown yet with my my artificial hip. The other well or field that I'd like to talk about that hardly anybody's ever heard of. In fact, I don't know anybody's ever heard of when I bring it up to them. Mm-hmm. They know about it after I bring it up. That's the Florence oil field. The Florence oil field is in the Canyon City embayment, just southwest, kind of mostly west of Canyon City, Colorado, on the Front Range.
Okay.
I'll
pull that up. Yeah.
Now, there was some, when was it discovered? Well, there was the Indians had been using an oil seep along a river for years to make their canoes impermeable to water and that type of thing. And they've been digging it out with the frontier people have been using picks. And they were getting a gallon, and up to later a barrel or two a day out of it, and using it for pitch and whatnot. In 1881, after the Drake well in Pennsylvania, they were drilling a water well. They were in shale.
This is in Canyon City.
This is just right
Colorado.
outside of Canyon City. Drilling a water well and discovered oil in fractured Pier Shale, and the Pier Shale was on the surface. So they were drilling, I think it was at 1,200 feet, and they drilled into a natural fracture. That's 1881. That field is still producing. It's made 18 million barrels of oil so far in a syncline in shale. Okay? Oldest field west of the Mississippi. Nobody's ever heard of it.
Wow.
Not so long after that, maybe 20, 25 years, it was like anticlinal theory. We're going for carbonates and we're going for sandstones in anticlines. People forgot about synclines. People forgot about shale. Shale was a nuisance. Called out to the rig. You go, what are you doing? We're dealing with shale. Okay, let me know when you get a break. That's the way it was. Nobody cared about shale. And yet, the oldest field west of Mississippi was shale.
Yeah.
Okay? And drilled absolutely. They did everything. This was not best practices. These were wooden derricks, foot to foot, and they blew the gas off. There was no pressure left. It was all gravity drainage. And there was some significant gas here.
Huh.
But now they've come back in the last 12, 13 years and drilled horizontally in there, and they run across virgin fractures. After all these wells, I think, what does it says? 1,300 wells have been drilled. Is that
right?
And it's only like 6 miles wide. Okay? 1,300 wells drilled, and they go in horizontally, perpendicular to the dilated fractures, and find virgin pressure new oil.
Jeez.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Okay. Here's another thing amazing. 1 mile, let's say, the number 42 well, which was drilled in 1889, is the oldest continuous commercial producing well in the world. It has produced more than 1 million barrels of oil. No telling what it would have produced if they hadn't blown the gas cap off.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, oldest in the world. Now, I hope I've got your audience's attention, because this certainly got mine.
Yeah, you got mine.
Okay. And it's like, and everybody, I'm looking around and everybody's going, oh yeah, we're going to horsepower our way into this
Right.
tight shale.
Right.
Okay. There's not enough horsepower on the planet to create the natural fractures that exist if you know how to explore for those natural fractures.
Yeah, man-made power versus, earth tectonic powers. The scale's a little off there.
Right. All right. So later today in our conversation, I'm going to talk about, I'm going to go through, this got me going, really excited, and I still am. I'm getting more and more excited about it. And then today, as we go through my history and almost 750,000 acres of land I've placed, we're going to talk about what we're doing now, and that's you and me are doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and it's the Eureka prospect, and it's in the southern Delaware Basin. And our petrophysicists and reservoir engineers have identified the potential for 488 barrels vertically and 2,447 barrels of oil per day horizontally. And at great depths and at incredibly competitive terms. So that's what I want to, that's the preamble. That's what I'm excited about.
Yeah.
And how did I get here?
Yeah. Let's hear it.
Well, we got to go back to 1977. And some people have told me I should write a book going way back before I got in the oil business.
What would be the name of the book?
Oh, Lord, I had never thought about it, Return of the Gringo, maybe, something like that. I don't know. That's just off the cuff. I hadn't really thought of it there because I never have really seriously thought about writing a book. But in preparing for this podcast today, I wrote a partial book because I really had to put my thinking cap on to go back to 1977.
Why is it that year that pops out to you?
Pre-oil and gas business. In the early 70s, I was a builder, and I built 50 homes in North Dallas, actually in Richardson, which is almost in the middle of Dallas now. And I got hit with the 73, 74 recession. I was going to be retired by the time I was 30. I had a game plan, man. And when the recession hit, it was horrible. Texas had usury laws, and the max anybody could charge for interest was 10%. Well, interest rates ended up going to like 19%. And money, which was not supposed to go out of banks into other states, was finding its way outside of the states. And people, the banks did not want to lend money at 9 7/8 when they could go to Arkansas and get 13 or 14%. So I found myself with 6 houses with interim financing that was eating my lunch, and I couldn't sell them. I'd go in with Texas Instruments was 3 miles from where I was building. I'd have 2 professionals married making good money at TI, and the banks wouldn't qualify them because they did not want to lend. So I was just sitting there paying out monthly.
Was that like a Texas thing, or what?
Texas, they usually law at 10%. Yeah, that was a Texas thing. And so, at the end of the time, I got my 6 houses sold, and instead of retiring at 30, I ended up with a $180 kickback from a real estate agent after I paid all of my subs and paid the bank back. And everything. That's all I had was $180 to my name.
What caused the recession?
The worst recession since the Depression. A bad one. A worst recession in 40 years.
What was it?
It's just called back then it was just called the recession.
No, but I mean, there's got to be a reason for it, right?
Oh, what caused it?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Saudis caused it.
That was the oil embargo.
Well,
deal.
it wasn't just the oil embargo. Nixon took us off of the gold standard, too. That's when we started getting those clad money that we still use. Copper in the middle and some sort of secret sauce on either side of it. I don't know what it is. But anyway, we're going through something similar to that right now as far as inflation goes.
I'm trying to figure out and make comparisons to
what's going on. We won't know until we can look back.
Damn.
Okay. You never know you're in a recession until you're out of it, usually. We're going into a recession.
I mean, I think you can argue that we're already in it.
We could be.
Yeah.
We just don't know. When you see the inversion between short-term and long-term interest rates, which we had back at the beginning of the year, and now it's big time. I think I read that the 18 times that that's happened since the early part of the last century, it is predicted at every time. Every time, not some of the time, every time. It's either going to be, it may be mild, or it may be a bad recession, or it may be a depression, or the Great Recession. But it is forecasted every time to be within 3 to 18 months before a recession hits. So that's happening now.
It's happening now?
Yeah.
And what was that again? That was the
difference, it's when long-term treasuries have a lower yield than short term. Okay, the main thing's like 3 month, but right now you can look at the 2 year as well, and the 2 year is like 4.5, and the 10 year is like 3.8, something like that. That's a huge gap between. Lots of times you're just talking about a few tenths. This is a lot. We're going to have a recession. You know, people ask me if you're going to have a recession. You know, well, what about a soft landing? And I say, we don't even know where the airport is. I don't know how we're going to have a soft landing. But, you know, again, I'm not a geologist, I'm not an engineer, and I'm certainly not an economist. And I definitely don't want to be the latter. You know, I would like to be, I wish I'd had a degree in geology. It was my favorite subject in college, and I wish I had pursued it, but I have pursued it, just not in an official capacity. I don't have a sheepskin for it, and I can't even begin to get in the weeds with real graduated from college scientists, whether they're just, you know, masters, PhDs, or anything. But one thing I have found out about myself, I may not be able to tell you that that's an ash tree and that's an elm tree and that's a pecan tree, but I can see the forest, and I can connect dots, and I'm real good at seeing things from 50,000 feet. Mm-hmm. But when I get down into it, you know, if somebody wants to talk about the vitrinite reflectance and all that type of thing, like, you know, can we go to the bar now? You know, let's talk about something else, because I just can't go there. And that's why I bring on people like you that do know how to go there. I'll bird dog something. And I'll go, God, this looks interesting to me.
Yeah.
And then I'll bring on scientists. The land grant thing, I had 11 guys working for me. You know, structural geologists, stratigraphers, geophysicists, you know, the whole 9 yards. But Troy, I found with you only need one guy, you know, and then at your recommendation, a petrophysicist and an engineer, reservoir engineer.
Yeah,
good guys, and it's there's so many people in the world, and scientists are not immune to it, that they've learned something.
Yeah,
they've seen it. Just like that engineer that pushed back, that wouldn't produce a drop on 23 million barrels. He should have pulled forward to me and go, I want to hear about this.
Yeah.
Instead, he pushed back.
Yeah.
And I've seen that so many times, and it's it's deal killers. The other thing is that a lot of people that I've had my best luck as far as bringing in people to look at things anew with folks that are independent. Mm-hmm. I found oftentimes people with companies that are with companies may not want to take that risk. They got their job. Yeah. The more deals that they turn down, it's kind of hard to. If you stick your neck out and go, yeah, I recommend that deal, and then it's a dry hole, then it's like,
Yep.
But if you go, that's no good, that's no good. How many deals you look? Oh, man, I've looked at 20 of them, and none of them look good. You know, okay, we'll keep looking. You know, it's like, okay, and I'll keep drawing my paycheck too.
Yeah.
You know?
No, that's right. That's right.
And it's nothing. I'm not knocking people that work for companies, you know, at all.
Sure.
But I do think that we have to keep taking fresh looks.
That's right.
And that's not just the oil and gas industry. Any industry gets into a rut.
Yeah.
That's the way we've always done things. So, okay. So, we started out like, well, this is what I talked about me wandering around. Yes, well, had that. Okay, well, I started out in the building business.
Right.
In fact, that was the major that I studied, at Trinity.
Almost retired, never drilled a well in your life, but it didn't happen. You didn't get to retire. You had to keep going.
What? Yeah, on the Eureka?
Yeah, well, just coming out of being a builder, you're like, I was going to retire at 30. You'd have been on the beach the rest of your
I
life.
never drilled a well. Never even considered about going into the oil and gas business.
Right.
As a matter of fact, I put my tail between my legs and went, screw this, I'm going to South America, which is what I did. I got on a plane and flew to Bolivia.
What the hell?
Well, I mean, talk about being dissatisfied. And I mean, it was like, okay, you get a loan, you build a house, that works out. You go back to the bank and you build 2 houses. That works out. You go, I'd like to borrow money for 4. Okay, you got a good track record. And I worked it up to where I was building a bunch of houses, And I put all of my money back into building. All right? I was living on $350. Here I was a big builder, and I'm living on $350 a month in the 70s. Because I was early 70s, because I was putting all my money back into the business. And it's like, you work hard, you save your money, you put your money back into the business, you win, right? Except for the Saudis, except for Nixon, except for things that you had that nobody could have foreseen.
Jeez.
Okay? So I was a young man. I mean, I was 26 years old. It hit me hard. I was very much I was working 7 days a week.
Yeah.
And so I left the country.
Jeez. Yeah. Bolivia.
Yeah.
Oh man, we had a guy.
I really left the country.
yeah. You took off. That's an interesting country.
I was living about 50 clicks east of a town in Bolivia by the name of, the town was Cochabamba. I was living in a town called, actually pronounced Villas Rivero, but in Spanish we would call it Villa Rivero. But this was like Castilian Spanish. This was I ended up in a little village that was like a time warp. And I went in there and I said, I'm going to import alpaca sweaters, I mean, I was grasping. I didn't have any money. I was like, what am I going to do? It's like, okay, these sweaters, they're beautiful. I'll do that. So I was buying them in the villages in Cochabamba, and I thought, I'm going to cut out the middleman. I want to find out where they're getting them made. So I did. And I went to Pio Zarretto, and I'm making deals for sweaters to be made. And with arms that long and necks that you couldn't get your head through, I was like, this is just really not working. And I walked by this open door, because there's dirt floors, no electricity, no running water, nothing. All the doors are open, and I walk by this one door, and I look in. It's kind of dark, and they're doing these tapestries. I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. So I walked in there, and I looked at them, and well, come to find out, this was a lost art in Europe. This was a tapestry weave that had been brought over by the monks, by the Spaniards, and completely lost art in Spain and in Europe, and that they were making them right here. So it was like this time warp. So I was like, screw these sweaters. I'm going to export from there these tapestries.
Wow.
Okay. Well, they caught on. Mick Taylor of the Rolling Stones, Joni Mitchell, a lot of the music people decided that they wanted me. A lot of those people are artists, painters and sculptors that said, not just musically oriented.
Yeah.
And so they would send me down their designs, okay, and I would take it, put a grid on it, and grid it up to like 4x6 or 6x4 feet, and then I would dye the wool, the different colors and whatnot. If I could, I would use the grays and the whites and the browns and the coffee colors and beige and all that type of thing. Then use the natural colors of the alpaca. And are you sure you want to talk about this?
I'm kind of in Bolivia right now
Okay.
with no running water and no electricity. I'm like standing next to you looking at it like what you're talking about. It's blowing my mind.
Oh, it blew my mind. I lived with the family, Indian family, for 6 months.
How'd you communicate with them? Did you know Spanish?
I'm really not very good at language. And for the proof of that, I took Spanish 4th, 5th, 6th grade, 7th, 8th, and 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th, and 2 years in college. And I still wasn't very good at it.
Wow.
And not only that, but these people spoke Castilian Spanish, which is the equivalent in English of Shakespeare, not Shakespearean. Shakespearean English.
Wow.
Biblical type stuff, these and thous and all that type of thing.
Wow.
So, so like I said, Villa instead of being Villa was Bia, and Rivero, Rivero, was Zribero.
Wow.
Okay, so, first of all, my Spanish wasn't that great. Then I'm hit with Castilian Spanish, and then a lot of the words were mixed in with the Indian language that was there, which was 23 different dialects of it. And but I got along, and I was down there for 2 years. I was down there for a whole year without ever coming back.
Wow.
And although it was a unique experience and wonderful and all that type, and I ended up moving into my own house. And my own house was 250-year-old adobe that cost me $12.50 a month to lease. Okay, I was living down there on $125 a month, and that included some extravagances of like going into town and getting a shower and getting an $8 a night hotel room when my whole rent was $12.50. Anyway, it was I wouldn't have changed it for anything. But I got back, and I was pretty much thinking about I was going to go back.
Yeah.
And a guy I knew was a landman. In college, I had taken numerous business law courses. Okay. And then when I became a builder, I got first a real estate salesman's license and then a real estate broker's license. So I was very familiar with business law and extremely familiar with real estate law. So it was the holidays, and I said, "Well, what are you up to?" In January, I want to go back over to Louisiana. I said, "What are you doing there?" I said, "Well, I'm a landman, and I'm buying oil and gas leases over there." And I said, "Well, I'm not doing anything. Do you mind if I tag along?" He said, "No, sure, come on." Right on. So went out there, and I was out there for a couple of weeks, and got the hang of running title. And then some guys got into the middle of our block and started buying. And he called the company, outfit called Midrock, and in Dallas, and said, "Hey, I've got some black hats in here buying leases. This is, can you send somebody else out there?" And the guy said, "Well, don't you have? Isn't there a guy out there that's with you?" And he said, "Yeah." And he says, "Well, has he picked up on this stuff?" "Yeah, he really has." He said, "Put him to work." And he said, "Well, you want a job?" And I went, "Well, I'm not doing anything. I'm not getting paid at all now to be out here." And he said, "How about $150 a day?" I've been living on $125 a month. Yeah. I went, "Man, how long has this been going on?" Really, all expenses paid, and I got 50 cents a mile. And I thought, man. So I went to work, and except the difference was, it was Louisiana. So it was Napoleonic law. And Napoleonic law is significantly different
Wow.
than Magna Carta type stuff, And but I got that, and that was in Ouachita Parish, Monroe, Louisiana, and I'm going to talk about that when we get into the when I broke out. And in fact, basically that's where we are right now. And then I went to Mississippi, and then I went to Alabama, and then I went to Colorado and Wyoming and Montana and North Dakota and Nebraska, and
Putting leases together.
yeah, and running crews, and then I went in house for a while, which we're going to talk about, and then I went and started drilling wells. I raised money to with some investors, and went out and drilled my first well in the Fort Worth Basin.
Son of a gun.
And here I is.
Well, you knew how to put the land and legal together, so you knew what that took, and then
working for the oil company as a land manager, I learned as a fully integrated oil company, which we're going to talk about, and so I learned everything I could. I'm a sponge when it comes to that type of thing. And I thought, well, I can do this. And I could, and I ended up hiring an engineer, had a scientist. He came up with an area, place to drill in the Fort Worth Basin. Said, X marks the spot, drill here. And then I hired an engineer, an ex-Halliburton guy, and we drilled a well.
Wow.
And I'll talk about that. It was a fabulous well for the Fort Worth Basin at that depth. And that was the beginning.
Wow.
But, and then fast forward to about 20 years ago, I was just drilling conventional wildcats, move here, move there, put 640 acres. Some of them I drilled on 320 acres. The biggest conventional I ever drilled only put together 1,280 acres. Okay. So then when I saw this 3 million barrels of oil and 78,000 acre block, I went, okay, this is graduate school. I'm interested in this, man. I'll go on to this. So I've never liked to have a ceiling on me ever. I've always wanted to be, what I could do, what I was capable of. Not that there was anything that was keeping me down, And man, there isn't anything keeping you down in this business. It's up to how hard you want to work and what your imagination is.
Wow.
And what you can do. So, hey, wow, you're doing it, man. Okay, and I'm real proud of you, what
Appreciate
you're up to. And this is a cool deal.
Yeah, so you start learning the legals, you start learning the land, you start putting this all together, you start realizing that, man, there's no ceiling in this now. Now that you know how to put acreage position together, you're looking at this massive position that did 3 million barrels. It's kind of getting us into the Milagro story. So I think we're transitioning into the drill down segment of the PBE podcast with DeWitt Smith. I want to know, when you identified that, and then you have the story of the land grant. What is a land grant?
Okay, well, there's two different types of land grants. And the history goes back of Spanish land grants back to the 12 and 1300s. Individuals or groups of individuals that had earned, acceptance or notice from royalty were provided with chunks of land, kind of like in Texas. Okay. With Stephen F. Austin, with his grants and the colonies and that type of thing here. And there are also Mexican land grants here in the state of Texas. little bit of a different animal. But we had Spanish land grants primarily in New Spain, which would be more like what you would think of as Mexico and south of there. And then you had New Mexico, and that was primarily Mexican land grants because the Mexicans ended up defeating Spain and it becoming Mexico. But they continued with the same type of grants. Well, the grants really were, as they moved north and into hostile territory, not only hostile territory from Native Americans, but also hostile territory from the French, from the Americans, which everybody was encroaching on Spanish territory. And the Indians were particularly scary. It was their land there, and it always had been, and they were very you went into their territory, you could count on getting arrows in your back or something.
Jeez.
So once they got up into the area of Santa Fe, which is the oldest extant capital in the entire what's now the United States, they went, okay, we are going to give land grants to individuals and groups of individuals, mainly groups, to form buffer zones between us and the hostiles. We got a nice little town here in Santa Fe, and we'd like to keep it that way, and we'd like to keep these people up north of us. So if you're willing to bring a group of people together and settle an area, and willing to fight off the hostiles and whatnot,
right.
If you did that for 20 years, then you could get a land grant.
Wow.
Now the land grant, and millions of acres were given out in land grants in Texas, Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, California, etc.
What years did all that, millions of acres go
out? Well, I can't talk to you about all of them, but mainly, let's see, the Tierra Amarilla land grant, which is what we're going to talk about today, was granted in, I believe, 1835. Okay, but that's not long before we came in and defeated the Mexicans and drove them back south of the Rio Grande and to the borders of present day Arizona and New Mexico and Colorado. California. And so, because the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was in 1848, so the land grant only existed as a Mexican land grant for 13 years. 13 years. Okay. Well, even Alexander the Great knew that you defeated peoples, but you didn't take their land. You take their land, you're not going to have much luck governing them. Okay? So don't take their land. Okay? So in the treaty, we, the United States of America, were supposed to view the new lands through the lens of Mexican law. Okay? Wow. So the land grants were supposed to be seen through that lens.
Yeah.
So then they appointed a territorial attorney general by the name of Thomas B. Catron. And Catron and what is described as the Santa Fe Ring, which were a bunch of gringos that really looked on the situation as, gee, here's all these Hispanics that don't speak any English and don't know our customs or anything. They're ripe for the picking, And Mr. Catron ended up being the largest single landowner in the entire United States of America. He owned 2 million acres that he had gotten from the land grant people by hook or crook. And somebody once said, small crooks go to jail, big crooks get counties and streets named after them. There is a Catron County in New Mexico, and there's streets and there's law firms and everything else. I can't. I wasn't there. I don't know exactly what happened. I've read a lot of books on it, a lot of books, done a lot of research, and Mr. Catron was going through crossing a river. I think it was the Chama River. Don't know exactly where it was, but I think it was the Chama River. In a buckboard, through high water, and all those deeds that were pre-treaty just washed away down the river. And those were all the claims that the heirs had to their land grant. Disappeared. Not all of them, but most of them.
Wow.
Some 178 different documents.
Wow.
Okay. And he ended up going and getting deeds from just a few people. And there were two different types of land grant. There was private land grants to an individual and community land grants. And community land grants really argued against American law in that it was really a commune. You owned maybe several hectares, okay, and you had your little garden there in your house and all that type of thing. But then you used the other 600,000 acres in this case to cut timber, to run your cattle on, and all that type. And everybody used the same land.
Wow.
Well, that's foreign to us. That's communism, and so anyway, what Catron ended up doing was getting deeds from an individual and a couple of his, 2 or 3 of his heirs. Well, there was 150 other people that had been granted in the community that were out.
Yeah.
And therein lies the rub. And so you had the Catron title chain, and then you had the claimants title chain. And they came and fought it 6 different times in the court of law. But we're talking frontier type stuff.
Yeah.
The gringo title was always won, even if it doesn't make. I spent a couple of years in the courthouse, at museums, libraries, etc., researching all this, and there's no question in my mind at all to where these people were screwed out of their land. And with Hispanics particularly, you take their land away, land is everything to them. These people are close to the land. You take their land away and they are disenfranchised. They no longer have identity. Okay? So you could say they were pissed off.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? To the point, in 1967, a guy named Reyes Tijerina, who was actually from Texas and a minister, came over to the land grant area and started talking to people, and he was like, what do you mean this happened? What do you mean that happened?
Mm-hmm.
He started looking into it. He was like, are you kidding me? They just stole your land. What are you doing about it? Well, we've been to court and stuff. Court's ass, this is hard. We're going to take this back. This is our land.
Oh, shit.
And he whipped 20 men into a frenzy, armed men, and they went to the town of Tierra Amarilla that sits in the land grant, the confines of the land grant, which is the courthouse for Rio Arriba County. And this is 1967, and they took over the courthouse at gunpoint, shot the place up, wounded 3 people, and a deputy sheriff later died of his wounds.
Damn.
Okay?
Whoa.
Serious cloud on title.
Yeah.
Banditos. Okay?
Damn.
Yeah. So, man. So ensued the largest manhunt in United States history. They sent in 400 National Guard, state and local police, and tanks to reestablish order. It was written up in Time magazine. They called this area, which back then pretty much not this bad. It was. I guess if you're in New York, right, for Time magazine, it seemed as remote as Tibet, which is the word they used. But it was out back. It was dirt roads and stuff for a long way. It was 100 miles north of Santa Fe, and 70 miles north of Espanola, and it was out in the boondocks, and.
This is all over the land grant that you end up
Yeah. So,
working.
how did I end up on the land grant? Where did this land grant deal?
Yeah.
Well, one of the tickets I had was with Amoco, coal bed methane gas in the San Juan Basin. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And they hired me. Had moved back up to Colorado, and I owned a house outside of Denver. They put me into a townhouse in Durango and a suite at the Hilton in Santa Fe.
Okay.
And I burned up the road between those 3 points and points beyond for a long time. Well, we started up north, and we came further down south and east, and got into Rio Arriba County, which is on the east side of the San Juan Basin. And they knew that I knew some Spanish. And I read it better than I do speak it and whatnot. And I said, like for you to go into Rio Arriba, the courthouse there, and run records, some of the, some Spanish, and a lot of the old records are in Spanish. So I said, yeah, sure, I'll do that. And I was talking to him for a while and everything, and he was like, "Okay, here's I'll send you a map of acreage that we're interested in. It's pretty big." And I said, "Okay, fine." And we talked a little while. I hadn't seen him in a while. He was up in Denver, and before we hung up, he says, "Oh yeah, don't be there after dark." And now,
he knew the history.
Yes. To some extent. But this is not long after I traveled all over South America by myself.
Yeah.
Some of the hellholes of the planet, particularly the border cities and the coastal cities and whatnot. It's so I wasn't too scared about going someplace in the United States of America, And I was like, okay, went in there, and everybody spoke Spanish, and they would speak Spanish to me. They wouldn't speak English. I'm like, okay, I can deal with that, the county clerk and everybody. And I found out. I did a little research, like what is this all about? I heard some talk about this, that, and the other. So I started doing research on the land grant, and I was like, oh my God, I'm right in the middle of it, looking around, these guys are armed and dangerous, Anyway, I picked up a ton of acreage, but I'm a curious sort, and every place I ever went as a landman, just when I was doing land work, I would do some science, do some research. Well, I found out that there were oil seeps that had been discovered back in the the first part of the last century.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't think of the guy's name, but the geologic library at Fort Lewis College is named after him. He was the geologist, and the only way I found out about it was when I was going back through the archives, finding a newspaper article from like 1903 or something, where he's talking about, I found some oil seeps there east of the town of Chama, and he described them. I later met with a guy right where that is Chama Land and Cattle Company, which is a kind of a dude ranch. It was owned by some wealthy people out of Dallas at one point in time, and then it's owned by the Hickory Indians now. But who had been the cook there on the dude ranch, and he had ridden on horseback all over that. And he had married an old girlfriend of mine, and they came to visit. And he said, "What have you been up to?" And I talked to him about it. He went,
he's going, "What?"
Yeah, he says, "I've ridden all over that area." And I said, "Well, they won't let me on there." As soon as I mentioned oil seep, it was like the phone hung up. They didn't want anybody on there, looking for oil seeps. Of course, anybody, they're huge. They're all right. Well, I don't know how big this room is. I was in one guy's room that I'd seen him when he was fishing there, an oil man, and he had a large conference room, and he said it was 4 times the size of this conference room. Okay, right on the banks of the Chama River.
Wow.
And he says, "I've seen it. I've been there." And I said, "Well, describe it to me." And he says, "It's real thick oil. It has reeds growing up out of it, and every once in a while it'll bloop. Just kind of a slow motion, pretty heavy oil." And I said, "Really?" I said, "Could you guide me there?" And he said, "Yeah, but I mean, it's the Hickory and Indians now. It's not the same people that had it when I had it. And they're kind of hostile. So I never did get in there. I tried. I even tried to go in there and be a guest and, see if I couldn't, find it. Anyway, they're real. They have been described by a geologist. I later realized that a guy named Vaughn, I think his name is Grady Vaughn, out of Dallas, an oil man, had owned that land, and because of the oil seeps, he'd found out about them, and he had drilled 5 or 6 wells. How hard can this be? I got oil seeps here.
Yeah.
Except the Manco Shale sits on top of the Dakota. Okay? Well, who cares about the shale? The Dakota sandstone sits right below it. Very poor sandstone. That's where to go. So he was drilling all in the Dakota. Unbeknownst to him, the oil was coming up through faults along the river. As a matter of fact, the river, as they do, was following the faults.
Right.
Okay? And so he never drilled into the Mancos. So he drilled dry holes in the Dakota. There's another, and this is fascinating, and I figured this one out, and everything's been written about it. It's great holy mystery, how this happened. It's the Price Gramps oil field, which was discovered in the 30s. Okay? It covers 128 acres. 8 million barrels of oil have been taken out of it. Taken out of the Dakota.
Oh, wow.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Well, they could only engineer a maximum of 2 million barrels of oil out of the Dakota. So where's this other 6 million barrels coming from, So they drilled all the way around it, ruining their economics. Dry holes all around it, looking for the river of oil that was replenishing the Dakota. Okay? So I'm very intrigued by it. And at 800 feet, too.
Damn it.
And the Mancos is at the surface.
Yeah.
Okay?
Money.
And it's this huge fault. On 4 sides, it comes up, it's thrusted up, and so it's just the Mancos there. And you drill through the Mancos into the Dakota, maximum of 1,200 feet because it's at a tilt. All right? And they drilled down into the anticline, right? So we'll drill here, drill into Dakota, make good wells, all right? And they drill outside of this very definite perimeter and nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what the heck? Well, I looked and looked and looked. I read everything I could find on it. And I found a well that had encountered oil in a fracture in the Mancos, okay, on the perimeter. When they drilled deeper into the Dakota, it was wet. And by the way, the Dakota is freshwater wet.
Wow.
Okay? Well, I'm already looking at natural fractures and stuff, and I'm going, I get it. I know exactly what's happened here. This 800 feet of fractured Mancos that's all broken up to beat the band is a water tower that's feeding oil as you pull volume out of the Dakota. Oil is falling out of this water tower into the Dakota and replenishing the oil.
Yeah.
It was at equilibrium, but as they started pulling out, oil starts coming down. And I went, okay. Wow. In fact, there's oil produced just west of there from 250 feet. And so everybody's like, well, it can't be fractured, da-da-da-da-da. Yeah, it's fractured beat the band. You can see the fractures on the surface. Well, then why did it leak off? Because it heals itself. Because the Mancos is super ductile and heals itself, but the interval that is productive is what is the Niobrara equivalent, and it's brittle siltstone. Okay? And so you have this super shallow fractured reservoir that everybody says can't produce because it would be breached, okay? And yet it does, okay? So, it's, I'm like, God, I'm unwinding all this stuff in my brain going, this is great, But I need to bring some other people on here that are smarter than me because I'm way beyond. Well, everybody said, well, where you are, it doesn't have a burial history. It's not mature. And I would show it the deal to people, and they go, before I brought geologists on, and they go, how about vitrinite reflectance? And I said, how about you get a Dixie cup and go over there and pull some oil out of that oil seep? What do you mean vitrinite reflectance? I said, most of the oil found in the world has been found on oil seeps, and we got them coming out of the ground, volunteering to the surface. I don't need vitrinite reflectance. I just don't understand some of this stuff, You have to look past some things, I believe,
That's right.
And then Price Gramps field discovered in the 30s, and they took a trough and sent the oil on the trough down to Chama, where they had a train that would transport it. And it was like 19 gravity. It wasn't complete. It was partially degraded. There was no gas. And it was partially degraded because it produced 21 million barrels of fresh water, along with that 8 million barrels of oil. Okay. And and it was meteoric water. Okay. So it's like everybody go, well, you can't produce oil with fresh water. It's like 8 million barrels begs a different with it. It's heavy oil, but it's commercial.
Associated with fresh water.
Well, okay. Eureka. That shallow oil we've talked about just to the north of it, which we're going to have here on our lease.
Nice.
That's the Rustler Formation, and the Rustler is named after a spring way over by Fort Davis, which is where the Rustlers watered their horses and stuff. It's fresh water. It's an aquifer, and it produced fresh water with the oil too. That 1.8 million barrels of oil, produced with fresh water. The land grant is the Tierra Amarilla land grant, yellow dirt or yellow soil, or whatever you want to call it, land grant. Okay, and that pre-existed. Okay. Milagro, the name I got from Milagro, and you'll enjoy it. There's a book by John Nichols called The Milagro Beanfield War, and there was a movie, Robert Redford movie, called The Milagro Beanfield War that was based on the book. Okay, well, they loosely base it on the 1967 courthouse raid. Okay, so I named my prospect Milagro.
I got you.
Okay, which means miracle in Spanish.
Right.
Yeah, your wife's Spanish, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I've spent a lot of time in Latin America, traveling, doing business, and a whole lot of time trying to get these people's land back. But they didn't have any money to fight lawsuits and stuff. It's like, I can make you some money, and did. And I helped them form a land grant association, which is legal even for claimants. You don't even have to own any land, which they didn't as the association. But if you're heirs and claim it, then you can form an association. Well, they'd never done it.
Certainly very, very interesting. I don't think there's a lot of people that studied, all this history in the detail you did, your boots on the ground. And in the 70s or 80s, when was all this going on in the Milagro?
Well,
when you're putting that
Milagro actually was I took it on in 2003.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So this is...
After I found that 3 million barrel field. 3 million barrel well. It's like,
yeah,
man, I need to look into this.
Okay.
And I knew, since I'd been there with Amoco back in the early 80s, and I had decided someday I'm going to roll my sleeves up, because they didn't want to buy any acreage in the land grant. Yeah. They were scared to death of it.
Right.
Everybody was scared to death of it.
Right.
It's like we take enough risk of not being shot at when we raise our mast, So I decided and when I found that oil seep, I went, I knew it. So what they said was, Troy, everybody said it hadn't been buried. There's no burial history. It hadn't been buried deep enough. And I'm like, well, where's this oil coming from? Oh, it migrated. I went, from over the mountains, No, I don't think it did. Well, that's what everybody kept coming up with, these dumbass ideas that, just like that doesn't make any sense at all. Okay. So I don't know what I can't do. I don't know what the proper way of things are doing, so I just light out on my own to do something that makes sense to me. Well, I found that there was an old coal mine down by the town of Tierra Maria. It was abandoned. It was a walk-in coal mine. The Menifee coals were exposed at the surface, okay? Well, the Menifee sits right on top of the Mancos. They had come in after it had been abandoned, and had gotten coal samples from off the tipple of the mine and analyzed it, and it was bituminous coal. Some of it was bituminous coal. Okay? Thermally mature. If that's thermally mature, then 1,500 feet down into the Manco Shale below it is thermally mature. It has been heated and pressured enough to produce oil and gas. Okay? So then there was another, and the same thing with the people that had discovered this 3 million barrel field, because just east of it, 23 million barrel field, just east of it was East Puerto Chiquito oil field. And it was at 3,500 feet. And they went, oh, it's not thermally mature. This oil had, and these are the guys that found it, the operator. Yeah. They said, it must be coming from somewhere else, Well, I found another coal mine there, and I found, and the USGS had done a survey of it and found it to be thermally mature. And I went, this is thermally mature too.
Yep.
Well, then I brought it back to all the scientists that had told me I was full of shit and what I was just chasing rainbows or something. I was like, how about these coal mines? Well, we don't ever look at coal mines. I said, you ought to take a look at these. And that's how I got going on this. That's how I built up proof to when people refuted the idea that this had never been buried deep enough and was not thermally mature. It's like, yeah, it is.
So what happened with this prospect? How do you take the land grant from what it was to proving,
Now,
to
this comes back to land work, okay, not geology, because nobody was going to go in there, okay? I wasn't going to be able to attract anybody in there. And so I helped form. I did the whole thing, organized the elections, the whole 9 yards, put up notices, went right down the book with the state of New Mexico, land grant organizations and whatnot, helped organize these people. And then I said, okay, you want to make some money? I said, this is, I'm gonna get these people, the operators. I'm going to do the science. I'm going to get them interested. Then they're going to go, I don't know about this, this title. And what you're going to do is you're going to give me a waiver. Everybody that comes in here and buys a lease from the gringo title is going to have to buy a waiver from you that says that, basically you won't shoot them.
what?
So I got a waiver and indemnification from a sanctioned a body under the laws of the state of New Mexico.
Sheesh.
And that's what that's the only way I could do it.
And then people started coming in and drilling?
No. I sold 90,000 acres to an outfit, Approach Resources. Did you ever run across them out of Fort Worth? All right. Anyway,
yeah,
they're bankrupt now, but they were doing real well for a while. But they got out over their skis, and then they blamed their financial people. They went, "We're not taking the blame. We're shutting you down." And you don't ever blame your financial people,
right?
Ever.
Yeah.
They don't like that.
That's not going to go.
So anyway, they came in there and they permitted 8 wells, and then I had another company that came in. I was like, okay, I got another 500,000 acres. And I'd showed it to a lot of people, and I hadn't had any luck selling it. And an outfit out of Canada, Wind River, called me to try to sell me a deal, and I turned around and sold them my deal. Okay? Well, the 8, it unwound real quick. They went to the courthouse, excuse me. They went to the Oil and Gas Commission in New Mexico, and they got 8 permits to drill. Okay, and this was their mistake. They treated the lowest stand of aspen trees, which are in the Rockies. There's probably no more valuable asset than aspen trees.
Wow.
They're just beautiful. Okay? People love them. I love them. They treated them like so many mesquites in West Texas.
Oh,
and
man.
They came in and bulldozed the area that generations of families had been picnicking in. Okay? Now, they told the lady who lived in Albuquerque that they were going to stake a location, and she said, okay. She didn't come out there to see where they were going to do it or anything.
Right.
But nonetheless, they came in there and they bulldozed 5 acres of aspen trees. And you talk about torches and pitchforks. Holy shit.
Wow.
And people, it was 3 miles from the courthouse. Okay. They could have walked there. But, and raised hell. And the county, okay, here's New Mexico. 30%, more or less, of their revenue comes from oil and gas.
Wow.
Okay. They got so much money coming in from oil and gas right now that they are offering free college to anybody at the state's colleges, to anybody in New Mexico, anybody and everybody in New Mexico. That's how much of a surplus they're running from oil and gas.
You can go to a state college.
If you're a citizen in I know a guy that just moved there with his kids, so they go to free college.
Wow.
Now, how do they handle that asset? Okay, you would think this would be way buttoned down. Look how much money's coming in. Okay.
Yeah.
So you go to the state for your permits.
Mm-hmm.
But drilling rules and regulations, county by county, a patch quilt put together by people that are county commissioners that know zippo about the oil and gas industry.
Wow.
I mean, they know nothing.
Each county has different rules about
Yes.
Wow.
And what happened was, okay, you already had the western part of, now this is so crazy. You got the western part of Rio Arriba County, which is in the old San Juan Basin.
Okay.
You got major oil companies in there and large independents. Okay. The county commissioners didn't want to screw with them, write new rules and regulations. But since there wasn't any production where we were, and since approach was rather small, independent, they went, okay, first of all, moratorium on drilling, stop everything. Okay, I know you got your 8 permit. Well, we don't care. It's moratorium. Well, we spend I don't know 2 years writing rules and regulations, and hope that your lease expires and all that type of thing.
Wow.
And so they wrote new rules and regulations, and those new rules and regulations weren't rules and regulations for drilling. They were prohibitive. There's no possible way anybody could drill for oil and gas under the rules and regulations. Troy, it was a taking. Okay?
Wow.
Now, in these notes here I remembered something. So that's a miscarriage of justice. Okay, it's never been challenged. Mora County, east of there, the county commissioners there okay, this sounds like a great idea. We'll do this. Except over there, it was Mother Shell who had put 200,000 acres together.
Holy
and when
cow.
they came up with the rules, they were coming up with the rules and regulations. They were saying it and everything. And Shell said, I
It's not going to work for
really
me.
wouldn't do that,
Yeah.
Because not only are we going to sue the county, we're going to see each one of you individually. Well, they didn't listen. Went ahead and did it. And Shell sued them out of their seats. And
Wow.
that didn't hold there. It's never been challenged in Rio Arriba County. So in western Rio Arriba County, you have one set of rules and regulations.
What the-
Eastern Rio Arriba County, you have another set of rules and regulations. And the state oil and gas commission sits back and lets this happen, even though that's a major source of income. They tried that up in Colorado. Boulder County tried that, and the commission there slapped them down so hard and so fast it made their heads spin.
Wow.
So anyway, that's the way that is. I think you'll find this interesting. And that is my official first meeting with the land grant heirs was in a back room of Foster's Bar in Chama, New Mexico. And they had guys with guns posted at the door.
Wow. What the hell?
Okay. And I'm sitting there, like, what am I doing here, man? And I decided I was never going to go back up there unarmed again, and I didn't. One of the guys that I became good friends with those guys, and one of them, several months after our first meeting, there's something called the Chama Mafia, okay? And it's made up of a bunch of real estate, supposedly, made up of some bankers and real estate people and surveyors, etc.
Yeah.
Supposedly, it's kind of like the Santa Fe Ring, which was I don't know. Did you see that new Billy the Kid series going? They talk about the Santa Fe Ring. It's very similar. They didn't want any oil and gas in there.
Okay.
Because it's pretty country, and they're real estate agents and
Right,
bankers
they're not
and stuff.
oil and gas
They didn't
guys.
care about it.
Right.
They also didn't want anybody challenging the Gringo chain of title. And this was, they saw me.
Right.
I mean, I guarantee you someplace, in an FBI file, they look at me as a land grant activist. I helped organize these guys. And,
Yeah.
I met with them. I got followed on a couple of occasions by, the typical black Suburban with blacked out windows and all that type of thing. It was
Wow.
it was kind of a weird deal. One of my guys got shot in the stomach with a black rifle and fell to the ground. And while he was on the ground, he was shot in the knee with a .45. The judge ruled it an accidental shooting. Okay, shot twice with different weapons, and it was an accidental shooting. So, it's frontier land up there. And that's, like I say, I left there just, let's see, 2011, I guess. So, a little over 10 years ago.
Right.
But I gave those guys hundreds of thousands of dollars. I didn't give it to them. They made it.
Created a way for them to make.
Yeah, exactly. I strongly suspect, and that and he's passed away now, so I hate to talk behind his back, but if he was alive, I'd be speaking just as direct as you and I are now. I strongly suspect that he thought that he could take some of those monies and go to the casino and double or triple up or something and go put the money back that he had taken out.
Mm-hmm.
He went through every nickel. There was not any money left. Okay? It's like, okay, well, I'll get another $40,000 and go down to the casinos, and he just got in. And so every bit of the money, I'd worked for years to give these people a leg up where they could hire attorneys and do stuff and whatnot.
Jeez.
I know. And then I had the other 500,000 acres. So all the hundreds of thousands that they made was just from the 90,000.
Wow.
So had to have another 500,000. But the people had to go take leases.
Right.
And they did. And what happened? And while they were sitting there getting ready to take leases and had landmen in the field and whatnot, then along comes with the county that shut everything down.
Writing rules against.
Yeah. So anyway, that's an aside. It's a different deal, but I was very disappointed by that.
Sure.
Because
the outcome.
I became very much interested in the plight of the land. And the Tierra Maria land grant is one of many that happened to. Some 78% of the land grants in California were adjudicated and found and given to them. Maybe 20% in New Mexico. The rest of them stolen, or what have you. Just say that 80% of them did not end up with the heirs. And I just don't think there's any way those heirs would have gotten rid of it. They didn't anywhere else. And Texas adjudicated them differently and did it well. There's
right?
a few exceptions. The King Ranch has been challenged many times, and Padre Island has been
Is that right?
challenged.
You ever go down there?
Huh?
You ever go down there, South Padre Island?
Yeah, I was just there 2 weeks ago.
Come on. You were at South Padre Island 2
Not
weeks?
South Padre, but Padre Island. I haven't been. When I was a little boy, we lived in Harlingen.
Wow, right
Yeah,
on.
so I've been over there a lot. But the last time I was actually there at South Padre, across from Brownsville, was 1983.
Wow, right on. That's right when my brother was born. Shit, I wasn't even born yet.
Was born where?
Well, no, it's just that year, or close to that year.
I know. Troy, don't rub it in. I'm old.
So- Damn it. So South Padre. So tell me about the Padre Islands. What? It's under a land grant or it's not?
It's considered to be partial under a land grant.
Oh, okay.
Right? And a King Ranch, definitely. But
Is that right?
anyway, you're not going to get anything out of the King Ranch, man. They're the ones that have guns on that one.
Yeah. Son of a gun, man. That stuff's super interesting to me. There's the history of that and how you're talking about these land grants. Kind of reminds me of the real old claims. They call them. Gosh damn it! Now that I'm thinking about it, I'm blanking. They're these claims that run around in the areas of Arizona and all this stuff that go back to the 1800s.
Hard rock claims, yeah.
Yeah, and they're basically kind of gifted to an individual or a group of individuals by the state because nothing was there, no one was there, kind of idea. And they're going, well, I think there's copper here, and I want this claim.
But they have to do something every 20 years or something.
Yeah, you gotta keep working on the shit. Yeah, you can't
supposedly.
Right. You submit something. But yeah, no, it's super interesting how all that goes, and then the rules and golly, I mean, what an experience! And like you say, that just wrapped up in 2011, huh? All that.
It's not. I would not call it wrapped up. Those people are not through. I mean, they're pissed off, Troy. They had their land taken from them, and they're not happy about it, and they're not going to forget about it.
Yeah. Yep. And then you came out with a way to get revenue back to them as
just squandered.
Yeah.
And as I found out later, and that man died. And he was somebody to be reckoned with too. He had done multiple tours in Vietnam and taught jungle warfare and Ecuador, and I had a picture of him squatting down with a head in each hand. He had worked with the Montagnards in Vietnam.
Oh shit! Yeah, I'm out on that.
He was. There were some badasses in that group,
Wow.
And I wasn't one of them, man.
You're trying to get them to integrate, man. I mean, sheesh, raw tooth and claw, man. Golly.
Anyway, root hog or die. You got to. If you're somebody like me, independent, and Troy, I went broke multiple times. That was 8 years I was on that land grant. 8 years. At one time, I got down to, we literally were going through the cushions of our couch in the living room. Found we had $13 and I think 83 cents, something like that, to our names. When I went down to close on the 90,000 acres, which made me a multimillionaire, okay, before lunch, I had enough. We maxed out the credit card. I got down there, and I got a nice hotel room at the Fairmount in Dallas because I knew they would ask me where I was staying because it sizing me up, And I got down there because it was a dicey deal, and we sat there and. I'm sitting there with the instruments, and I ain't getting them to them until the wire that they had just sent hit my bank.
Wow!
And my office in Colorado was waiting and checking every once in a while to see if the wire had hit there, and it became lunchtime, okay, and it still hadn't hit, and I was like, okay, well let's go buy lunch. Let's go get lunch. Well, guess who was making all the money? Me. Okay? But I didn't have any money. I couldn't afford lunch for me, much less for everybody else.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
I was broke before lunch, and after lunch, I was a multimillionaire.
What the hell?
Okay? So the guy that ended up being my partner, Vance Payne in Smith & Payne.
Yeah.
Okay? He was on the other side.
Is that right?
And I knew him, Okay? And so it was we were leaving. I kind of went back and grabbed Vance by the elbow. And I said, you're going to have to get lunch. I can't afford lunch. And his head swiveled around. So we had him, you know?
Wow.
I was completely broke.
Holy shit.
So he ended up liking the way that I handled myself, and we ended up being partners. He's dead now. He passed away this year.
He did?
Yeah. Never smoked a day in his life, and he died of lung cancer.
Huh.
Isn't that crazy? Just a complete straight arrow. You know, he liked his whiskey, but he never smoked. And
where did he get lung cancer from?
I have no idea.
He didn't work shafts or
no,
some weird.
No, hell knows. In fact,
breathing.
Luckiest guy in the world. He got drafted to go to Vietnam, and they sent him to Hawaii to do typing. Okay.
Wow. Yeah, the one in like 100,000.
I said, "Did you smoke any dope over there?" I mean, I was thinking, you know, all this Maui Wowie and Thai sticks and everything. No, never did. That's how straight he was. I mean, he's in the service. He's in Hawaii. It's the 60s. Okay.
Didn't touch
and he dies of lung cancer.
Golly.
No kidding.
Wow.
Isn't that incredible?
Damn.
Anyway, good guy.
Sorry to hear that. Yeah.
And but boy, I tell you what, his eyes snapped. You could hear his eyes snap to the left before his neck ever turned around. It's like, oh man, we had this guy, because they tried to hold my feet to the fire that morning at the lawyer's office. Here's the thing.
Wow.
Vance, his company, had put up some of the money for me to do the deal, but not very much. What they were bringing to the table was that they had an oil company, and they did have money, and they had scientists and all that type of thing. Vance was a landman. I needed help putting acreage together. Okay? Well, after 2 years, they had never taken a lease. I'm going broke. You know, I'm working on this huge land grant stuff, and I'm going broke. And I finally went to him and I said, look, I tell you what, you turn this back over to me. I thought you guys were going to buy leases. You hadn't buy one lease in here in 2 years. I said, you know, what good are you doing me? And you got half the deal. I said, now they had tried to sell it, but I mean, it was a Mickey Mouse deal. So I said, give it to me for, I'll sell it in 180 days. And if I don't sell it in 180 days, I'll give it all to you.
Sheesh.
Okay? So I had 4 days left on that 180 days when they were telling me. That was big time poker, but it's like, fine, don't buy it. I don't care.
Oh, sheesh.
Anyway, yeah. So,
all right.
That was my first real money. Okay?
Yeah.
I mean, I you know, you're drilling wells and you've got production and it's rolling up behind you, and you're making a living, as you've heard me say, a hard way to make an easy living, but never accumulating a lot of money.
Yeah.
I'd sold my production and got a pretty sweet deal, but it was $15 oil, you know, and $1.50 gas, and these were older wells by that time. You know? So that was my first real money. And then the Leoncita was added to that. And then I was going to retire, except for this doggone Eureka, which we're going to talk about. Okay?
All right. So the transition from Milagro to Eureka is the Leoncita.
Yes. I told my guys, I said, I want you to find a similar setup and
structurally. Tectonically
in the Permian Basin.
Right on.
Well, the situation in New Mexico was a north-south fault, was a Nacimiento fault system.
Right.
And the northwest to southeast, that 70-degree angle you see over and over again, was an extension of the Anadarko shear zone.
Right.
And they crossed right at the land grant. And like I said earlier, it's a train wreck for the Niobrara. Oh, by the way, I couldn't sell that deal. I couldn't sell it. And never would sell. Up in Colorado, The Niobrara deal is just
blowing and going.
blowing and going. I'm like, what's the deal? And I went, this is Niobrara age. This
Yeah.
So I started calling it Niobrara. 6 weeks later, I had it sold.
Son of a bitch.
After years of trying to get it placed, all I did was change the name.
Golly.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a bunch of. Sometimes the oil industry is like a lot of sheep. It just is.
Yeah.
Okay, I would like to, before we get right into that, the lab, basically, the fractured shale lab that we used was the Rocky Mountains. I mean, what better place for natural fractures than the Rockies?
Yeah, one of the biggest mountain building events
Well,
in the world.
You won't recognize all these names. You're certainly going to recognize, and so will our audience. These fields starting at 6 o'clock, if you will, and in New Mexico and going on up into Wyoming. You got Puerto Chiquito field, which we've talked about, and then you got East Puerto Chiquito. You got Boulder field. Those are smaller fields. Rio Puerco field, the Verde field, Rangeley, which was discovered at the turn of the last century, that produced millions of barrels of oil. You can see the anticline from your car, okay? And the Mancos is at 1,200 feet. Toe Creek, Sierra Madre, Buck Creek, Salt Creek, Teapot Dome, which everybody's heard of, Silo Field, which everybody's heard of, the Jake Well, which is a fabulous well, and the Wattenberg Field, and then Wattenberg Field in general to the north where the mineral belt is, where it's highly fractured. That's great. And then Florence Oil Field, which we've talked about, and then down to the Milagro prospect, and then back to Puerto Chiquito. And Milagro was just kind of a missing button on a shirt. It's like, let's do this.
All have in common naturally fractured reservoirs.
All have in common naturally fractured shale reservoirs.
Gotcha.
Okay. And some of them most of them way before anybody thought about, hey, let's go for shale, man. It's who really opened it is George Mitchell in the Barnett Shale. But as I said, in 1881, we found naturally fractured Pierre shale, and I call it Pierre because it's spelled Pierre. It outcrops in Pierre, South Dakota.
Okay.
And so it's called, and they pronounce it Pierre, not Pierre. I say it all the time because it's spelled Pierre, and I go, Pierre. So you've got, so we looked at all that, and one of the places that people should really look if they want to do some more, what I call the Bible of fractured shale, is a guy named Bill Mallory, with the USGS out of Denver, and he did a whole study on fractured reservoirs. In fact, it was called the United States Geological Survey: Oil and Gas from Fractured Shale Reservoirs in Colorado and Northwest New Mexico. Okay, and it's a quick read.
Yeah,
it's fabulous read. It's way interesting. So I thought I'd read a few things that I think are germane to this, that I think will blow a lot of people's minds.
Please.
Width of fractures may vary from hairline to cavernous. Cases are known where the drill string has suddenly dropped 15 to 20 feet. Right? A high-capacity vertical fracture system with fluid transmissibility that may be as high as 500 Darcy feet divides the rock into blocks of nearly impermeable shale whose internal fracture transmissibility is about 0.01 to 1.0 Darcy feet. So what you have are these like parallelograms.
Yep.
Okay? And these blocks, which can be like up to like 200 acres in size, are bound by faults.
Wow. And
okay?
Yeah.
Well, What's your chances of taking an 8 5/8 inch hole and drilling into a principal fracture? You have to do what I call, you've heard me say it before, an AT&T frac. Reach out and touch someone, or drill horizontally.
Right.
Okay, to get into this, and that's what happened with this 3 million barrel well. They drilled with 8 5/8. They were in a tight block. They didn't do anything. They fracked. You could be 2 feet away and not know that you're there.
Because the rock is completely impermeable.
I'm going to read you something that they found at Puerto Chiquito and Boulder Field was that there was what they said was, quote, 0 matrix porosity.
Right.
Okay? The entire, I said this before, all the porosity, permeability, and storage was the planar voids of the faults.
Yep.
Okay. This is at Rangeley Field. In one instance, willow branches about half an inch in diameter and 6 inches long were pumped down a rotary hole to fill lost circulation voids. Some of these willows were recovered along with oil and mud from a nearby cable tool hole penetrating the same fracture. The intersections of these fractures with the two holes are known to be at least 175 feet apart, and they're finding willow branches as big as your thumb, 175 feet away from the other borehole. Okay? Now, I've also had people tell me, faults don't, open fractures don't exist at depth. Probably, I don't know, maybe deeper than 4,000 or 5,000 feet because of the overburden. They think it's closed it up.
Yeah.
That's just simply not true.
Yeah.
That sounds good. You'd think it might be the case, but it isn't true. And this is here. In air-drilled holes, the dusting may have temporarily ceased and or gas or oil may have been noted, maybe. In rotary with mud holes, watch especially for lost circulation in shale zones. Well, we certainly know that. On electric logs, a kick on the self-potential curve may or may not be present and significant. Okay? So if you're going off of logs, or if you're going off of samples drilling with mud, right, you're SOL.
It works some places, but yeah.
It does work some places. But here's the question. How much better would that well have been if you had drilled it with air or drilled it with cable tools and not plastered all that mud back into the hole? Okay? Because all you're doing is pushing all that mud and LCM way back. You can either you have a limited communication with your reservoir, or it's gone.
Yeah, what an interesting concept. So while drilling, if it's pretty tight rock, it's got matrix porosity, that kind of idea, and you start losing circulation, you throw a little LCM down there and you mud up, and it's supposed to be just near wellbore, should cake right up, and you just keep drilling. You should keep getting your cuttings, keep getting returns. But when that doesn't happen, and all of a sudden you're losing 100 barrels of mud and you're losing all this LCM, shouldn't that be an indicator of like, hey, let's stop here and see what it has to give rather than let's try to plug it up.
Nobody does that. They're not looking for natural fractures. And what happens is it's like it's a nuisance zone. Oh my God, you can't believe how high my mud bills were.
Right.
It's like you just bypassed possibly a huge opportunity. Okay. Cuttings from rotary drills are of little value in detecting and evaluating fracturing. Now, this is the most, I think that I have to make this point. I know we need to get into further on, but I hope your audience is paying attention here, because this is also from Bill Mallory. About 90% of all fractured shale reservoirs were discovered prior to 1935 and after 1955. Okay? Why is that? One word: mud. Okay? Up until 1935, it was mainly cable tools. After, it says right here, prior to 1935, conventional use of cable tool rigs made fractured reservoirs easier to detect. Come to see you, you know? After 1955, a limited revival of cable tool drilling and introduction of rotary drilling with air restored earlier advantages in detection. Okay? So
Wow.
what's the best way to find, if you know you're in a fractured area, like we do, okay?
Right.
Then you drill with air. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. Now, as you and I know, we've talked with engineers before. Oh no, we're gonna drill with mud. You know, it's like, you know, we get better samples and you know, we prevent blowouts and all that type of thing. Well, yeah, but I thought we were looking for oil here. Okay, here we go. On interference tests. Now, this is from Al Greer, who discovered the Puerto Chiquito field. On interference tests in West Puerto Chiquito, measurable pressure changes occurred in observation wells within 24 hours of commencement of production of wells as far as 1.5 miles away. You've got a conduit, a fracture that is just a pipeline. Mm-hmm. And you've got interference tests that are affecting pressure of producing wells 1.5 miles away. Okay, in 24 hours. That's mind-boggling. All right. So I would say to people, okay, drilling along, you get this fracture. Oh, that's the drill bit. The weight of the drill bit is causing these fractures. And I'm like, no, these fractures pre-exist. They're tectonically there before they ever heard of a drill bit in these parts, you know. But they go, no. These are
Drilling
fractures.
induced.
Huh?
Drilling induced.
Drilling induced fractures is what they say. That's another argument.
Right.
I don't know what the resistance is to this, but let me tell you, I've certainly run across a lot of it. Okay. Okay. Here's Al Greer, you know, and here's the guy, you know, 23 million barrels, you know. You're automatically a smart guy when you find 23 million barrels. He says, a well cored in the Verde field, located on the northwest shelf of the San Juan Basin, showed concrete, quote unquote, evidence of the fractured reservoir, was recovered. There were no problems interpreting fractures in the core. The entire core was laced in dendritic pattern of fracture, quote unquote, casts, consisting of oil well cement and lost circulation material, which had filled the natural fractures. Jeez. One large fracture was represented by a cement slab 7.5 feet long and 1.5 inches thick, and equally thick from one side of the core to the others. Okay? What this doesn't say is that the protocol was to drill with mud vertically to within about, I don't know, depending on the operator, 50 to 100 feet of the target Niobrara zone. Mm-hmm. Okay, and then they would cement the pipe, you know, put a shoe on, cement pipe, and then drill out the shoe and core it. Okay, in this particular instance, usually what they would do is just drill out the shoe with air and drill through the interval with air because of natural fractures, but also, in this case, because of swelling clays. You've heard me say a joke that they shouldn't have brought a canteen on location here because of all of the swelling clays. This had been a highly volcanic area back in this period. Anyway, so in this case, they came down, if I recall, they didn't start coring until 32 or 3 feet below the shoe, okay? And they're bringing up oil well cement, okay? And you've heard me talk about this too. Everybody's always talking about, well, we retrieved the core but it was incomplete retrieval.
75%, yeah.
Okay.
Or whatever.
Well, this would have been incomplete retrieval if the cement had not come down through the fractures 32 feet. And they cored like 20 feet. So, I mean, it was more than that. Like, let's say 50 feet. Anyway, it got down to here anyway where they cored.
Yeah.
The cement had set up inside of the fractures. And so it was a cast. Okay? It was an exact cast of the fractures, which if you had pulled up the core without that cement there, they would have collapsed. And you're going, incomplete core retrieval again. What's wrong with our core bells, damn it? It had nothing to do with that. When you see incomplete core retrieval, you're trying to retrieve voids,
right,
which you can't retrieve. Now, you can retrieve some smaller bugs and stuff like that, but natural fractures are going to collapse when you drill through them and pull them up.
Right.
Okay? So this is why he called it concrete evidence, because they had heard it too. It's like, oh no, there's not open fractures at this depth. Yeah, they are. And here's, evidence of it for anybody that's So you've already seen. So this is the cautionary statement they put together. Conventional drilling and completion practices have no application in the fractured reservoirs and result in large amounts of mud and LCM plastered into fractures, sealed off access to reservoirs due to swelling clays, in this instance, sealed fractures from cement, so they were doing an open hole. You set casing through this, if it's big time fractured, and you put a bunch of cement out on top of the mud and everything out there. And then modest wells or dry holes after even large fracs. And of course, everybody wants to acidize too, so they push the mud back even further, So anyway, this is, like I say, this is not to say you can't make a well. It's just like, how much better would that well have been if you drilled with a different protocol and drilled with air and not pushed all that stuff back there. One more quote here. And I alluded to it. The operators of Boulder and Puerto Chiquito pools have recognized the producing reservoirs to be of fracture porosity only, although the majority of the industry's oil reservoirs that are fractured are those that comprise a rock with matrix porosity laced with fractures. Okay? So when we think about induced fractures, we think about, okay, let's create these voids, let's create these fractures, and then, we'll get some flush production, and then the matrix porosity will bleed into these fractures and we can recover that. Mm-hmm. The reason that this well made 3 million barrels of oil is because the fractures had been created 35 million years ago. Okay? And even though we say, okay, there's no matrix porosity, there's always some, but it's certainly not going to move in real time. But give it 35 million years, and it's going to sweat into and fill up those voids. Okay? So in the case of pre-existing natural fractures, they fill up with oil. It's like our petrophysicist and reservoir engineer said. We look at the logs, we can't come up with a number on the oil and gas in here, okay? All we can tell you is if these natural fractures exist, like your geologic study says, they're going to be full of oil, okay? So you don't have to wait for this matrix to slowly bleed back in. We see these
sharp declines.
Sharp declines because you create the natural fractures, but pretty quickly you're off to what was there before you ever fracked it. You've communicated way back in there, but now you've gotten your flush production out of these fractures. Now you're waiting for bleed in, and which I would imagine that some of these wells in the Wolfbone, like the Sprayberry, same thing, will produce for 70 years or longer. You know, they're tight, but they continue to produce slowly. Okay, so I kind of got off on this. Okay, so I decided that let's find a similar setup.
Right.
And what we found was a place where we had the 1.2 billion year old Texas zone that runs all the way from Africa.
That's right.
Through here, and
Texas
it was
shear.
crossed at and by the way, that's about 70 degrees as well.
Yep, north 70 west.
Yeah, and we see the basin and range faults that are much newer that cross it and reactivate that 1.2 billion year old fault zone.
Yeah, you got the Nakazari slab tear running through. You got all kinds of structural things going on right
Exactly. How about Pangea running into it like a bumper car?
Yeah, yeah.
So anyway, where we are at Eureka is naturally fractured, and you have done looked at 900 wells, and we've got 300 technical slides that you've come up with, and we know for a fact that it's fractured to beat the band. Maybe we're not going to drop the tools in the hole 15 or 20 feet, but you can have hairline fractures even that produce an amazing amount of oil. I had 1 foot of Darcy. What's the word for it? Microlog. I'm sorry, 1 foot of good microlog.
1 foot of good microlog.
It flowed over 100 barrels a day for a year before we had to put it on pump.
Sheesh.
1 foot, okay? A hairline fracture can produce for years, depending on its extent and whatnot. So, but we have seen all of the things that we look for, and that we're told to look for by the experts, the USGS, people that have successfully drilled naturally fractures, etc. We have proprietary well logs for one thing out here,
Right.
that nobody else has, or at least nobody that we're aware of. We've seen bit torquing that we see when we go through fractures. We've seen calipers off scale that a lot of people say, that's it's a washout. Those are fractures. We know by putting it together with other information we have. We've seen rotary mud drilling, lost circulation. We've seen a lot of that. We've seen rotary air drilling where dusting ceases for a long way. And everybody goes, oh, well, if you don't have enough pressure there, if you're losing air, I mean, come on, there can't be anything there with any pressure. That's just not true. And Bill Mallory at the USGS tells us that. Right. And I don't understand the dynamics of that, but we know to look for lost circulation, even with air. We've seen mudlog descriptions down here that describe the zone as cavernous. We've seen gas flare and oil on pits in tight zones. Where's that coming from, And we've seen hundreds of barrels of oil in shows that have been produced. What got me interested down here, and also what, I was in I put 118,000 acres together, the old Leon Cedar Ranch, and started doing some research in there. And because this was an area that I knew was going to be naturally fractured. And somebody said, well, you guys are prospecting from 50,000 feet. And I was like, yeah, because when you're looking for natural fractures, that's what you have to do. You're looking for tectonics. And I bought a shale log from NewTek, Alan Howard. And this is what brought him down. His company that he was part of, Throne, bought 35,000 acres through me, placed with them. He said he was down there because the highest calculated barrels of oil in place for one well that he'd ever seen in all the logs he had run in the Delaware Basin was right here on the ranch.
Wow.
737,701,000 calculated barrels of oil in place per section. 750 million barrels of oil in place. Okay? He said he'd never seen anything like it. And says, that's why we're down here. They never even asked to see my science. I thought, well, that's kind of hubristic, but okay, as long as you buy 35,000 acres, it's a deal. Now, here's the interesting part of it. And of course, they immediately went after the Woodford, and I told them, I said, no, the Woodford's, that's dry gas. You don't want to go after that. Well, no, it's not. Well, they're following up on John Comer, who had been extremely successful in the Woodford, bird dog in the Woodford up in Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. Okay. And he saw a similar setup down here and had mapped it and everything. So they saw this one, we'll go after the Woodford. I said, it's dry gas. I said, it won't make, you can't make it at these prices right now unless it's liquids rich. Oh, no, it's liquids rich. We know it's liquids rich. Okay. So, they never made it to the Woodford. And then I placed 82,000 acres with Devon. And Devon, who was a big player in the Woodford up in Oklahoma, came down here for the same reason. They never looked at any of my science either. They never wanted to see any of my my logs that were proprietary logs. And I said, look, I'm not trying to rope you out, but I've got these logs, and I'm not supposed to show them to anybody unless I have a confidentiality agreement. Well, we're not going to sign that. I said, yeah, but you're going to find out that that's dry gas. You don't want that. Well, you don't know what you're talking about. Who are you? Anyway, not me. My scientists say this, And so does this, they only got 78. One of the wells that was tested, they tested it for weeks, and there was only 78 barrels of condensate produced during the whole time. It's very dry gas.
Yeah.
And so they drilled that. They drilled 2 wells over there on their acreage. And I talked to them, and I said, well, what about it? He said, well, we got gas. And I said, you sent any fluids? I said, no. And I said, yeah, I didn't think so. I said, well, what's the deal? He said, well, it's a commercial well, but it just doesn't. We're Devon. We're, a publicly traded company. It's not going to move our needle. I said, but we think we have some cement problems too. And I said, well, that wouldn't surprise me because of all the samples and everything, the descriptions that's very churty. And it's described as fractured. There's fractures in some of the samples that were brought back. So I would guess that it would be pretty easy to have a cement issues. Yeah. Wow. Well, about that time they're messing around with it, and they temporarily abandoned it for a while, and then the price went down, product, and they let go a bunch of people, and they brought on a new head of exploration. And he said, we're going to circle the wagons on our core production fields up north of here, and we're not doing any more exploratory stuff. So they shut in the wells. So I never got any good test on either one of, and nothing on the Wolfcamp and Bone Spring on that 118,000 acres. I'm like, woe is me, man. What's the deal? I mean, yeah, I'm making some money on these things, but that's not what I'm here for. I've never been in here just for the money. I'm here to find oil and gas. I'm an oil man. That's what I do. And yet, but I had accumulated enough money to where I was going to quit until the doggone Eureka got my attention. And that's where you come in, and that's where we are now.
Yeah.
And the Eureka is Let me look through my notes here.
Yeah, no, take your time.
Here it is. And really, Troy, this should have been mentioned in the beginning because people have been going, God, this guy's just going to drone on forever. Where are we going with this deal? And I should have said in the beginning, oh, by the way, I've got a prospect right now, and it's been thoroughly scienced and engineered. And the petrophysicist and the reservoir engineer say we got 488 barrels of oil per day vertically, and 2,447 barrels of oil per day horizontally. That's what this engineers and the petrophysicists say combined.
Mm-hmm.
And why don't we talk about that some? I've been talking. You're the scientist here. You want to talk a little bit about it, or you and I can swap back and forth? Talk to us about the Eureka.
Yeah. No, you approached me asking for a structural interpretation of what's going on here, and how could there be a naturally fractured reservoir in the Wolfcamp Bone Spring? And if it is there, wouldn't it be filled with oil? And so we got to dive into that. You know, you really put that together. You put a lot of data together. You had proprietary logs, and you had this information. So I was familiar with the story of Pangea, obviously. You know, you got your...
Kind of a big story, yeah.
Right. You got a really locked-in converging vector, and that's big for structural geology. Yeah, that's what this block is saying. This is the Andy cube from Molly Turco, and that's exactly what you're doing. You're going on outcrop, or you're going into an area, and you're lining up your converging vectors. You're lining up sigma 1, sigma 3, sigma 2. That's what geologists do, and it's just how things break. It's how a piece of wood breaks, a 2x4. If you have a converging vector in a 2x4, it'll break systematically, and all these fractures start happening the same way over and over and over, from grand scale to drill hole scale, from tectonic scale to drill hole scale. And so you put me to the test.
Fractals.
Yeah.
From something you can see from outer space down to the microscope.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So, okay, if this is real, or if it is breaking, the way that these drill hole scale logs are saying fractures are breaking, then does that line up with the regional scale stuff? Does that line up with what's going on in Marathon and all this outcrop work that's been done for 50, 60 years, you know, Marathon, and understanding Pangea? And sure as shit, it just keeps lining up. I'm going, man, this is pretty cool. You know, if you can take something from tectonic scale to drill hole scale, now you have a really predictable model. You have something that you can use to start making predictions and drilling into and seeing if those predictions are real. But without that data that you've compiled, you just kind of go from tectonic scale and you know, who knows what to do with it. But you've confined it with a top and bottom time, an age. And so now we have a lot more data, and the rest of those 900 wells and the well logs and all that information that is narrowing us in at this Bone Spring Wolfcamp time. The Wolf Bone, if you want to call it that, or Eureka.
We call it Eureka.
Yeah, and it's Eureka because it's a world-class reservoir that's been naturally fractured. We know that there's millions and billions of barrels that have been calculated in place by the USGS and others, petrophysicists, and all the work that's been done in the Wolfcamp and Bone Spring of the Delaware Basin. We're in the south side of this thing, but what makes it Eureka, I think, is the naturally fractured patterns that we're seeing. And you're talking about cracks, planar voids. You're talking about all these things that you've seen in other areas, in shales and in source rocks that have been naturally fractured. And so that's very, very exciting. We see a lot of this data coming back and repeating itself. So a geologic model should have good repeatability, and you should be able to use it to make predictions. And that's where we're at. It's the project we have.
And that's the other thing, is that I didn't mention when I was talking about that 737 million barrels from that New Tech shale log calculation. Yeah. 42% of that he calculated to come out of the Bone Spring and the Wolfcamp.
Yeah. Right.
So, and also, we found that USG, because a lot of people think it's gassy down here.
Yeah.
Well, there's been a lot of gas produced down close to us.
Yeah,
But we're seeing 34 and 36 gravity oil is decidedly not gassy. And according to the USGS, we're, I think, from 4,200 feet to 10,020 feet or something like that, directly in the oil window, which is right in the middle, the heart of what we're looking at here.
Yeah.
So we've got, it's definitely not gassy.
No, yeah, gassy stories coming from rocks that are like 300 million years older or 200 or whatever. It's a whole nother converging vector, a whole nother situation where a lot of that gas is coming from. So
we've put together this study. So we're going back 20 years from my like, wow, 3 million barrel well, and doing a full study with 11 geologists looking at naturally fractured reservoirs in the Rocky Mountain Lab to, hey, let's find this in the Permian Basin, to now to the Eureka Zone with a thorough study. And we went out and we showed it to one company. One company. We've only showed it to one company.
That's right.
Somebody that I knew. And they said, we'll give you a verbal for 75%. We want it.
Yeah.
But we're non-ops. I said, okay. So then we went, and some of this we're going to have to farm out. And we went to the company and that owns the leases, and they said, yeah, we're interested in farming out to you, but you don't operate. You got to have an operator. I'm like, okay. Well, from my perspective, here I'm sitting, I have never had a prospect where I didn't have a handle on the acreage.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you're just going out. I mean, how can I go to NAPE and go, hey, look what I got? And they go, oh, yeah, it's unleased. This is great. Thanks a lot, DeWitt. Appreciate it. So I'm sitting in a situation right now where I'd like to go to NAPE, for instance, and show this. And which I went to NAPE, twice a year for years, almost 2 decades. And but I can't do that with this.
Yeah.
So we're in a situation here, a great situation, where we got 3/4 sold to one company, and now we need an operator. But how do we approach the operator? We're going to have to go one by one, and some of them may not. The way to protect myself is to do a CA or non-compete. Mm-hmm. And some people don't want to sign those. And I'm not trying to block anybody out. I'm just trying to protect myself. This covers a hell of a lot of acreage, and we're not trying to corner the market. But to all you smart landmen that are out there, and if you work for a company or you drill wells yourself or whatnot, let me know how you would approach this if you got some ideas. Or if you're an operator out there and you don't mind signing a CA when you're looking at over 2 million barrels of oil horizontally, or almost 500 vertically. By the way, here's something else that I think is extremely important. We've got 2 wells here that have been drilled, casing set, cement circulated to surface. The plug is below our target horizons. They even have well heads on them.
Yep.
Okay? We can re-enter those wells. We're talking about a very inexpensive proof of concept. We're talking about you go in, you check the competence of your pipe. If it's good, you go in. If it's not, you may have to squeeze. I doubt it, though. These wells are not that old. Mm-hmm. And it was, like I say, it was cement was circulated to surface. So probably got a good cement job. It was drilled with air, and all you got to do is perforate swab, see what you got, and then treat. All this stuff is going to have to be fracked. Even the 3 million barrel well had to be fracked, and every one of those wells that never flowed, that made that 23 million barrels of oil, every one of them had to be fracked.
Right.
And none of them flowed from the beginning. Okay, so here and Mr. Operator, this is ground floor. You're not paying a dime over actual cost.
Right.
Any acreage acquisition cost, any G&G. There is no G&G to you. There is no override above and beyond. So, I mean, this is a bird nest on the ground. It's a great looking deal.
20 to 30,000 acres, right? Right.
Yeah,
Pretty much right away.
Well, 20 to 30,000, depending. It depends on the appetite of the operator. The 75% working interest has a strong appetite. But they recognize the need for an operator. And I don't mean this anyway, it can't be just any old operator. We're going to need some operator that is familiar with the Wolf Camp and the Bone Spring.
Right.
And that will be found acceptable to this rather large oil company that we're going to need to get the farm out from. And so we're ready to go. So we're looking for an operator. Yeah. It's what there's an expression that comes from the long haul truckers in Texas. They roll up to a truck stop and run in there and be in a hurry like they always are and order a cup of coffee. It's hot as lava. So they pour it into the saucer and blow on it, drink it right out of the saucer. And it's called saucered and blowed. So if you want something completely done, it's like, well, what? You want it all saucered and blowed? This is saucered and blowed. This is all saucered and blowed. It's ready to go. And we'd love to hear from you.
What do you think about the industry as a whole right now? We talked about recessions and comparing it to what you went through from your building experience to being in Bolivia. That whole thing sets you up. Arguably, we could be going to something like that. Where do you see the future of energy? What are your thoughts, in the next 5 to 10 years for energy industry?
Oh, I look out even further than that. We're not getting rid of oil anytime soon, as much as they'd like to. They seem to think that the automobile. Okay, we convert from ICE engines to and go to EVs. That's going to solve the world's problem. Well, I mean, I go off in a bunch of different directions here, but one of them is we already have grid problems.
Yeah.
What about people coming home every night at 5:30 or 6 and plugging in their EVs? What's going to happen then? We're having blackouts by people just turning on their air conditioning.
Coming home to watch the news.
Okay, so I mean, the other thing is, yes, that's right, clean electricity. All right, really, where's that electricity come from? Is it from hydroelectric? How many rivers did you have to kill to get that? Is it from coal? Well, that's not exactly clean. Is it from gas? That's cleaner.
Yeah.
Is it from electricity? Well, people over in Europe have found out, particularly in England, that when the wind stops blowing, that's not such a great deal.
Yeah.
Okay. They also found that the sun doesn't always shine.
That's right.
Well, how do you build? It's one thing to produce that electricity, but how do you store it?
Right.
If you don't have constant, it gets nighttime every day, I've found, So anyway, so there's some problems there that we've got to find. But the other thing is that, Troy, my God, there was a magazine. I wish I had it. It was the front of the magazine, and it showed this family of 4 out in their backyard, 2-story house, nice 2-story house, and they had brought everything into the backyard that wasn't nailed down in that house that was made from hydrocarbons. Mm. It was the kids' toys. It was the lipstick. It was the medicine.
That's right.
It was the appliances the toasters and stuff. Everything
That's right.
is made. Your ice chest.
No.
I mean, we all know that in the oil
right.
business, but a lot of people don't realize what all is made from oil and gas. The
Yeah.
other thing is that you're talking about emerging. Maybe we could fix something in the United States. What about these emerging countries? They're driving mopeds and advancing into cars, and they're happy to have them. They don't have electricity. In fact, in South America, they went directly from no telephones to cell phones because they didn't have copper lines.
Right.
Okay, and so you're going to find a lot of and China, what do they care? They're putting in new coal powered generators as fast as we can shut ours down.
Yeah.
And here's the thing: the transition, most people think, is some sort of light switch.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't. Mm-hmm. This is going to take decades. Are we going to transition? Yes. But I'm not worried about oil and gas going downhill for another 30 years.
Yeah.
And
I would say ever. I mean, we're a hydrocarbon species.
They're going to look back at us and wonder, and historically, and go, they burned that shit? Of all the things that can be made from hydrocarbons.
Yeah.
Feedstocks for all kinds of stuff, It's,
well, the battery technology you're talking about, the storage batteries, in something, it appears to be possibly coming from something called graphene, and graphene's a hydrocarbon. It's a type of kerogen, essentially.
That's right.
We live and we rely on we live and rely on the biosphere, which is hydrogen, oxygens, and carbons.
Uh-huh.
And the combination of hydrogens and carbons is the foundation of our energy. It's the foundation of what we do and what we are. And so how that's made is one problem, and better understanding that, we can better understand how to use it and be more efficient. But to turn away from it, it doesn't make any sense to me logically when you think about the biosphere as a whole. But what I'm finding out, or what I'm starting to discover, I think, is that electric vehicles makes more money. So it's a better money maker. The ICE motor, the internal combustion engine, has gotten to a point that it's so efficient and it's so reliable that it's actually not great at making money. And we need to make money. And if we are in a recession and we need to figure out better ways to make money, then I think the EV car has a place in this, not because it's cleaner, not because it's better for the environment. You can go and talk to people all day until you're blue in the face about where those metals come from and how you actually make that car.
And where we're going to get them from.
Right. So it's just different, and it makes more money.
Well, not only that, but... okay, we talked about not a light switch. It's going to take decades. So, shut down the pipeline. We don't do that. People on the East Coast are importing natural gas liquids, NGLs, from other countries.
Yeah.
Okay? Because they won't let them build a pipeline from the Marcellus to the coast. How stupid is that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And we could be energy independent and working on these other things. But the other thing is, and why is it always Democrat versus Republican?
Sure.
You ever heard of an oil man that voted for Democrats? Oh, hell no. And also the oil men put up a lot of money into politics.
Sure.
They'd like to get rid of us. But have you ever heard of a guy that is doing windmills and solar that voted Republican? No.
Yeah.
So there's I don't exactly understand all those dynamics, but that is the bottom line.
Yeah.
If you want to get rid of your competition, and get rid of a big money source that's going into like the Koch brothers, for instance. They put fortunes into the Republican Party. I don't want to get into politics, though. But
sure.
Golly, have we not heard enough about politics
right.
For quite some time? But So oil and gas.
Well, energy. Yeah.
Energy. Well, energy, that's funny you should say that because, for 25 years, the oil industry was I went through it, was in the pits. As I said, when I sold my production and got out of operations. Because I had enjoyed about as much $15 oil and $1.50 gas as I could stand. It's is it going to continue to go up and down like that? Are we going to have an ebb and flow? I don't know why not. We always have had in this industry. Mm-hmm. Somebody's always doing something.
I feel like it's going to be strong for long. I feel like it's strong for long. I don't know what long means yet. I don't have an idea if it's 10 years, 15 years, but I don't see how we can rebuild the global economy that we have between communists and capitalism and all the in-betweens. It's built on the back of human flourishing. It's built on the back of building societies that have hospitals and schools and everything for people to live and to flourish.
And they need energy.
They got to have energy. Energy's in that. So to rebuild from what's going on here, if it is a recession, how could it not be $80+ oil for a reasonably long time? I feel confident about that, and
I feel good about it. I think we're out of that era. I don't think we're approaching peak oil. I think let us explore.
Yeah.
We'll find more. There's
Yep.
plenty left. We sounded the death knell for the Permian Basin not that long ago, and now we're going to produce more oil than has ever been produced out of the Permian previously.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So energy. Yeah, I had a guy tell me. He says, "Yeah, I'm in the energy business." This is back in the 80s and early 90s. Where he says, "Oil, gas, coal, and firewood. Whatever it takes to make a living in this business."
Yeah.
Troy, I don't think we're going to have that problem anymore. I think, as you say, I feel good, and this is not a rah-rah cheerleading deal. I'm a stone cold sober when it comes to this type of thing. I've been through it. Mm-hmm. I've been through the first well I ever drilled. Okay, was in the Fort Worth Basin. Came in 2.5 million cubic feet a day.
Jeez.
From 4,600 feet out of the Atoka D conglomerate.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Engineer Lim Nations, a full-blooded Cherokee that had been retired from Halliburton and was now doing engineering on the side, said, and it was right. He says, "You're luckier than a dog with two fill in the blanks." Okay, and I agreed with him. I was just like, "Golly, this is wonderful." Well, that was great. Except I had raised money to drill that first well from my investors, some of them friends of mine, when gas was $3.30 a thousand. And this is in 1985. Okay? So what is that? That's better than $10 gas now, adjusted for inflation.
Wow.
Okay? By the time I got that well hooked up pipeline, the price had dropped to $1.10.
Golly.
Imagine any other people go, "Oh, these oil guys, da da da." Man, we risk everything. Nobody name another product that takes a 2/3 hit in 6 months. Okay,
wow.
How can you plan anything when you have a situation like that? I had to gut that well to get my investors' money back. A good well too. I had to pull it hard, and I did. And so I wasn't quite as lucky as he thought I was. It felt lucky at the time, but finding it's not all there is to it. But you've got to be smart. Another old man I knew, old time old man, said, "Any dumb son of a bitch can make $1 million in this business, but it takes a smart bastard to make a living at it."
I love that.
And $1 million back then was what he was talking about was from the 50s,
Right. Right on, DeWitt. Well, I enjoyed the heck out of this show. Thanks for
Me
taking
too.
the time.
Thanks for inviting me, Troy. I rarely get somebody to sit down and listen to me. Plus, I've got an entire audience out there. So maybe we'll get a little notoriety, and maybe somebody's going to want to join us in getting some wells drilled out.
That'd be awesome. That'd be a lot of fun. We'd do a follow-up podcast for that.
Okay. Thanks, buddy.
Yeah.